So gallery.json, and I'm just going to open this up and we can take a look here. Let me get these guys out of the way. So this should look pretty familiar to you based on what we've done so far this semester, and even maybe the introduction you got to JavaScript back in the Web Technologies class. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And so as you can see, these are object literals with the curly braces. They're contained within a big array. When you see the square brackets here, you know it's an array, and you can see the different objects in there are separated by commas. So each object here is, oops, don't do that. Each object is an item or element within the containing array, the parent array. And then inside each object you have like property and value separated by a colon, and then each of these entries is separated by a comma. See, this is nothing new. So what looks different about this? Well, one thing you might see is that I'm using double quotes instead of single quotes, which is not that interesting in itself. A lot of people use double quotes when they're doing JavaScript. I don't tend to. I tend to use single quotes. And so this might be a little bit different from my coding style. And the other thing is that I've put the property names in quotes. Now, property names in JavaScript are strings, but because they can only be strings, JavaScript has made it so that if there's no spaces or punctuation within the property name, then you can do it without the quotes. However, JavaScript object notation, JSON, is like a subset of JavaScript. It's got stricter rules to it. To wit, the property names must have quotes around them. Any string, whether it's a property or a value, must be in double quotes, not single quotes. These are not JavaScript rules, right? And in JavaScript, you can have a trailing comma here, right? After the last item in an array or an object. In JSON notation, you cannot. They're just the Z out to make sure I don't do any mistakes. And then the final thing is that in order for this to really be JavaScript, this object really doesn't do anything on its own, right? If this were JavaScript, you would expect to see something like let gallery equal, and then set the value that's being initiated to this array, or sorry, this variable would be this array literal down here. So you don't see that in here either. So what's the point of doing it differently like this? Why, one, do we have this not assigned to a variable or constant? And two, why all the really strict rules about no trailing commas and only double quotes and the property names have to be in quotes and so on? The reason why is that JSON, JavaScript object notation, can be read by a wide range of different systems. It can be read not only by JavaScript, but by, as far as I know, just about all C-based languages, C, C++. It can be read by PHP. It can be read by Python. It can be read by Ruby. And who knows? I mean, just all kinds of different coding environments or coding languages have some kind of way to parse their way through JSON files. And for that reason, JSON has been very popular in storing data on the web. It used to be XML. XML, which is like a strict, well, it's not a strict version of HTML, but it's like HTML. It's a markup language that has a lot of the same syntax, but it's much stricter. And same thing, the reason why it has to be stricter is because it has to be read by a lot of different coding environments and different systems and different languages and so on. So everybody needs to know exactly how it's going to be coded so that they can parse it the way that they need to within their own language. And so JSON is the same way. JSON, theoretically, I really like the idea of XML because markup languages are there for like structuring and storing data and content, right? That's like what they were built to do. And yet JSON notation is so much easier to read and it's so much easier to write, so much less verbose, it's got so much less punctuation in it. It's just so much easier. And for that reason, over the last 10 years, XML as a way of storing data online to be publicly consumed has been dying out. Like I rarely see it anywhere anymore. And when I do, I expect, oh yeah, this is kind of a legacy, storage here of some very old data maybe, because I don't know that anyone is really going to choose XML these days over JSON. So anyway, this is what JSON looks like. This is an example of JSON, and I've got this here because we're going to be parsing through this using fetch in JavaScript, and then using that to build a template to get some of the images and their titles and descriptions and alt tags and so on into HTML. Okay, so what's the second part of this? The second part of this is fetch. It's called Fetch API. It's really just a native part of JavaScript. It used to be that we would use AJAX, which is asynchronous JavaScript. I can't remember. I used to know what it was. Oh, JavaScript. Yeah, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That was it. And XML, like you can see how old it was, right? That was back when people were using XML for all this stuff. So AJAX is an old system of grabbing data from an external file using JavaScript and looping through it and then spitting out that data to the page. So you could store all kinds of information in a flat file without having to use a database. If you've got some very simple information that doesn't need to be persistent across a long time, it's just to store something like this, like gallery information or something like that. Then you could put it in an XML or JSON file and use AJAX to grab that from an external file and get it onto your page. AJAX is gone. It is gone. If anyone asks you, like in a job interview or something like that, say, yeah, we would like to see if you know how to use AJAX. Can you do AJAX for us? You can tell them flat out, AJAX doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, you can code it, and it'll still work, but it's very legacy at this point. And really, AJAX is built on top of Fetch now. Fetch is the way to do things. And if you write XML, I don't know why you'd want to anymore, but if you did, the interpreter will literally interpret it as fetch. It'll convert it to a fetch request and run it that way. So fetch is it for now. Let's go ahead and try some. So I'm going to take the gallery.json file here, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it into my JS subfolder here. I suppose by all rights, I've always put it in the JS folder. It never occurred to me until like just now that maybe the data should actually go in a different folder because it's not actually a script that I'm running here. But this is fine. This is fine. Go ahead and put it in JS. And then take take the rest of the images in here, which are these guys. If you only get 4 or 5 of them, that's okay. It'll work the same way. You'll just have fewer images on the page. So I grabbed everything except for gallery.json, and I'm going to copy that, and I will put it into, I don't have an images subfolder. I better make one. You can call it images or assets, either one, or media. Media would work too, but something like that, something that's it's very clear to a team member exactly what it is that you're talking about. Anthony, go ahead.
Unit 9, your Unit 9 folder, is that a copy of the Unit 8?
I made a copy of Unit 7 just because Unit 8 has a lot of Vue stuff in it, and we're not going to be doing Vue tonight.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if you do that one. That would be fine, but a Unit 7 would probably be easier. Okay, so I put some images here into images subfolder, which we made fresh, and then I just threw the JSON file into the JS subfolder here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this index.html and just, oops, I did not mean to make a copy of the JS subfolder. I just meant to make a copy of index.html. Yes. And then I'll rename this to gallery. Not strictly necessary, of course. Since we duplicated this whole folder, we could just jump right into the index.html without breaking anything, but I think that I'm going to go ahead and try to be a little strict with myself. I'm going to pop over to here, and I'm going to go ahead and open up a folder because that's the way for the server to work. Let me get myself to Unit 9, demo, and here we are. Okay, good.
Do you mind if I just see the folders in the Unit 9 again? I'm just kind of confused.
Yeah, sure. Here they are.
And resources, are those the images? Or
Well, I started by putting them into the resources because that's a good place to start if you're not sure what you're actually going to be using directly in your project or not. But ultimately, I created an images folder inside the root folder, and I put all the image files in there. And again, if you just put some of them in, that's fine.
okay.
And then in the JS subfolder, I put the gallery.json file.
Okay. And do we need those other files?
No, I guess not.
Okay.
Just the images and the JSON. Okay. Any other questions before we get started on the coding bit here? Okay, so here's my gallery.html, and I'm just going to, well, I've already commented this stuff out, so it's fine. I guess I haven't commented this one out. If you've got any like JavaScript files being sourced in already, then just go ahead and just comment them out or just delete them. Either way, just want to be starting fresh with this file. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to get the server started. Remember, fetch won't work if you don't have some kind of live server to run it through. In fact, before I run this live server, I'm just going to go ahead and do some of the coding, and then we'll go ahead and test it out. And that way you'll see what kind of message you'll get from the browser if we're not running this through a server. So for demo purposes, instead of creating a separate like another script file here, I'm just going to go ahead and create a script tag right here in the bottom of the body element. And then we'll just run the script right in here and test it out. So here's what a fetch call looks like. A fetch is based on a promise, and promises are a larger topic in JavaScript that we don't have time for, but I recommend that you read up on your own after the class is through. But it makes use of like a function, and then we attach then methods onto them. And you guys know what a method is now. It's just a function that can be attached to an object or another function using the dot syntax. So it's going to be a fetch function, just like this. So fetch, and then the parentheses. And then we will see a dot then. And then ultimately we will see another dot then. So this is kind of what promises look like, and it's a way of making sure that things happen sequentially in order because JavaScript is largely asynchronous. So this is what it's going to look like. But I will go ahead and get rid of that and just start within this first set of parentheses, and we'll add those thens back in there as we work. So the first thing is going to be that we need to tell the interpreter where we want to fetch from. So again, fetch is a way of grabbing data from an external document. In this case, it's going to be this gallery.json that was provided. So that's going to be in quotes. And let's go ahead and put JS, because it's in the subfolder, JS/ and then gallery.json. So it's going to be pulling data from this external file. And actually, I bet if I just save this right here and without doing any then methods and just go ahead and open this up in a browser, I'll open it up with Chrome and then open up the console. And you can see that I'm getting all kinds of error messages here, even though, I mean, I've only written like a tiny bit of code here. And it's complaining at me as hard as it can, right? Access to fetch is denied. It's been blocked by CORS policy. So that's cross-origin policy. Cross-origin requests are only supported for protocol schemes, HTTP, etc. This protocol is the, well, it's not showing it here, but it's the triple slash protocol. It's file ///, which means that it's opening up a file directly from the user machine, in this case my machine, and that doesn't count as running it through a server. And so that's why we need to get it running through an actual live server. So if I close that and go back, oh look, I've still got this thing open. If I go back here and go live, and let it run through here, and I'm going to grab this and pop myself back over to Chrome. And then I open this up, then it's not giving me errors. It's still giving me an error. It can't find the favicon. I don't know why Chrome sometimes complains about that when you're running something through a server, but I'm not going to worry about it. So anyway, the CORS policy error went away at least. Anthony, go ahead.
You click go live from the gallery.html?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was right down here, and once you click it, now it gives you the port number. Just go away.
Mine says open a folder or workspace.
Oh, yeah, you got to open a folder first. So go to File and Open Folder, and then I chose my root folder here. Actually, I chose Unit 9. I should have chosen the demo folder, but it doesn't matter. It's still working. So just select the root folder that's got your HTML file inside of it and open that up, and then you'll be able to use the Go Live down here.
Okay. Okay, that worked.
Awesome. Okay, so this by itself doesn't do anything. It actually has. It's grabbed. Well, we can't see it right now, but it has grabbed the data from the external file, that gallery.json file. So now it's when we attach that first then method. So this is after the parenthesis closes here. Put the dot and then with another pair of parentheses because this is a method. And this is going to have a function in it which we will pass a variable into the body of this function. So it's going to be an anonymous function. You could write it this way. So like function, and then it's going to be a variable inside of that. And then we could do, the whole thing. But this is not the way that it's usually done. Usually people use the fat arrow notation that you guys learned about how you can do shorthand notation for JavaScript functions, as long as you don't need to set scope, which I know we haven't talked about. So anyway, it looks like this, and I'm doing it this way because this is the way you will almost always see it. The variable that's being passed in is usually called response, but this is not a particular, this is not a requirement. Like this variable could be called Fred, it could be called hey you, it could be anything, right? And then you use the fat arrow, and then a code block, and then you can do things with this variable that you're passing in. So just to be clear, this is the same thing as doing declaring an anonymous function here and then passing a response variable in like this, right? And then we can use response inside of here. But you almost always see it like this. So the thing that we have to do inside of this function that we just created, there's only one thing that we really need to do, and that is to tell the JavaScript interpreter how to interpret this JSON or this file that it's calling in, how to parse through it. Is this going to be plain HTML? Is it going to be plain text? Is it going to be XML? Is it going to be what have you? In this case, it's JSON, right? I've given you guys a JSON file, and that means we need to parse it as JSON. So there is, if you do like response, which again, this is the variable that we passed into the function here, there is a JSON dot method or JSON method here. And so we've just told the browser interpreter to grab the gallery.json file and interpret it as JSON, parse it through as JSON. How are you guys doing so far? Unfortunately, this isn't really the kind of thing that we can keep like testing in a browser as we go. We kind of have to build this whole structure and then we test it in the browser and see if it's working. Okay, so one more piece of logic to do. I told you guys there were going to be two then methods. Here's the other one. You attach it right onto the JSON function there. After the closing parenthesis, do another then, which gets another pair of parentheses because it's a method, it's a function. And we're going to pass another variable into another anonymous function here, and this is almost always written as data, like so. So it's really at least a three-tier structure that you get here. And now finally we've gotten to the point where we can try to spit something out to the console and see if this thing is working. So the simplest thing that we could do at this point is just do console.log data like this. So grab this external file, store it in a variable called response, parse it as JSON because it is JSON, and then that parsed JSON is here, and we're going to take that and log it to the console. So I'm going to save that and pop over here. No, I'm going to pop over here. Nope. There it is. Okay, so if you've got the live server going, then you don't even need to hit refresh. I do anyway because I forget. But here we've got something in the console here, and all of a sudden Google doesn't seem to mind that it can't find the the favicon. I don't know what Google's thinking, but anyway, here we go. Here is, it looks like an array of 8 items, and I pop it open, and look, there are 8 objects in there. This should look familiar. This is exactly what the JSON is. So why do we need to go through all this work? Well, again, because it needs to be parsed as JSON. You might think, well, it's already in JavaScript notation. But you know, JavaScript follows the same rules as everybody else. If we were in PHP, we would have to take that and parse it as PHP from the JSON file, and we have to do the same thing here. So that's what the fetch is all about. And that's the way it's almost always used. I have used fetch before just to pull in plain text files because you can store HTML templates in there and then slap them down into different parts of the page if that's what you want to do. But most of the time, this is what you're talking about. You're talking about an external JSON file that gets parsed through like this. So now that we've got this, what would be much more likely that we would be doing, instead of just slapping all this stuff out to the console, although really this is probably the first place to start, whatever you do, so I'll probably do exactly the same thing when we start pulling in data from our third-party API. But after that, to put it in a useful format, you want to get it into a loop. And so it can be a for loop, or like a for of loop, or it could be a regular for loop for that matter. For loops work with almost everything. but I'll just do like for let L for element of data, excuse me, and then let's console.log L for element. And this should get it into a form that's a little bit more useful, that we can see what's going on. And when I refresh it over here, now it's, instead of like being in a big or array that I have to open up, now it's showing me each of those objects individually, and then it gets a little bit easier to see what's going on and to figure out, oh, okay, so how am I going to use this thing? What kind of properties am I being provided from this JSON file? Oh, look, okay, there's an alt. This is probably going to be images. There's a description. I've got a file name, and I've got a title. So those are the things that I can use. So for instance, instead of just saying console.log L for each one of these, I could say console.log L dot, well, I'll start with title, like this. So that's one of the things, one of the properties that I saw when we used this. So basically it's this thing. First of all, you spit out the entire object that you're grabbing, so you can see, oh, okay, it's an array. Let's go ahead and do a loop with that stuff, and you do a loop, and then you can see each individual item in there and inspect it and see what kind of properties you have to work with, and then start experimenting with some of those properties. So I'm grabbing one of the properties I saw, title property, and I go over here, and now look at that. It's just grabbing and it's spitting out those titles. If I wanted to do description instead, then there we go. I'm getting the descriptions instead. So that's kind of the process that you want to go in with it. Do your logic structure first, spit out the whole piece of data to the console so you can analyze it, then start looping through it and see what kind of property names you have to work with, and then start working with the property names. And by the way, because this is an array, you could use the for of loop if you wanted to. I tend to myself, but you could also, if you wanted to, you could experiment with a for each loop. So you could do like data.forEach and do the same thing. I'll do L.title again, and there they are. So it's just whatever one you like. This one is a method that is a function on an array. And this one is just a regular for of loop that works for arrays and also for like node lists and HTML collections and so on. So whichever one you prefer. Or even if you prefer just the old-fashioned for loop that you guys learned in C++. All right, how you guys doing? Anybody have a question so far? It's cool stuff.
Do you mind going back like a little bit so I could the one you just showed before you press Control Z?
Oh, the for of?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Let me just get that.
Or being
Thank
the
you.
for each, yeah. I mean, I guess it is a little bit more concise. I don't know. I like them both, I guess. Okay, cool. So it shows a couple of possibilities. So I'm going to use this guy here. I'm going to comment both of these out. I don't actually need anything on the console. Let's make a bit of a template here. So I'm going to take the, I don't know, let's check the HTML here. We've got a main element, don't we? Yeah, we do. So let's see. Yeah, I guess I'll just add it to the bottom of all this. I mean, we don't really need this stuff here. I'm just going to take all this and get rid of it. You don't have to. I just want to make this clear as possible for you guys. So I'm just going to have an empty main element like this. But if you leave your stuff inside the main element, that's perfectly fine. Just the gallery will show up underneath the stuff that's already there. That's all. So I've got a simplified page here. And what I'm going to do, this is inside my loop that's inside this then promise that's inside this then promise, which is inside the fetch function. Now I'm going to put something else inside the fetch function here, which is I'm going to say let main equals, and I'm going to use a document query selector so I can grab the main element, which is what we'll need to do if we want to actually take this data and put it into the main element. So you guys know how to do this from last week. Document.query selector main. Now I don't expect this to be available outside of the fetch function, or rather the then promise. So if I go over here and type in main, I'm expecting a reference error here, and indeed that's what I got. But it will be available to use inside this fetch block here, or this then block rather. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go to our loop and we're going to template out what we want to add to main here. And this is the way this is going to look. There's several different ways you can do this. I mean, you could use like an append child thing. You could use concat. I'm going to use concatenation. I'm just going to say this is the easiest thing, I think. Just main.innerHTML, which you guys did last week, and then plus equals. So this means every time it goes through this loop, it's going to be adding something to the inner HTML of main. I really, just so you guys know, HTML is, or inner HTML, using inner HTML or outer HTML is dangerous because whenever you change the HTML of an element using one of those two properties, one of those two DOM properties in JavaScript, it removes anything else that was contained within that element. So, and I'm thinking particularly of events. So you may do all kinds of work adding events to certain elements, and then you just, without thinking about it, change the inner HTML of the item or the element, and then all of a sudden all of your events are gone, and you don't even know it. So for that reason, I mean, you'll see a lot of developers out there just say, yeah, just never use inner HTML, and I would generally agree with them, except in this case where there's literally nothing in there, and it's like you're initializing this main element. Right? You're giving it its initial content. And then after that, I would leave inner HTML alone. I would use some other methods. I would use one of the other, like one of the operations, like append child, or insert adjacent element, or insert adjacent HTML. I know we haven't learned any of those, but you can learn them on your own. Just be aware that generally speaking, use inner HTML only for initializing an element, or maybe for setting its shadow DOM, and again, initializing the content. So anyway, enough said. So main.innerHTML. So we're going to have several different things here. What I want to have is I want each image to be inside of a figure element, which you guys may or may not recall from your web technologies class. And I want the title to be in the heading, let's say an H4 heading. And then there's going to be the image itself, and then the description is going to be in a fig caption element, like a figure caption. So this we could all do, like we could do these separate lines of HTML using like single or double quotes, but then recall that these cannot be on multiple lines. Like you can't do this in JavaScript. So that means that each time we would have to concatenate it. We use all these plus signs, and it gets all weird. And plus the fact that we won't be able to interpolate any values inside of here from L. We'll have to do more concatenation for that. So my recommendation is to use the backticks and create a template literal. And that can go onto multiple lines. So I can start it up here and start it up here. So it's a template string that can be on multiple lines, and I can interpolate values inside of the string from L. So let's go ahead and do some. Let's go ahead and do an let's start off with our H4. I'm going to make an H4 element in here. And we want to test this first. Before we do a whole lot of work, I just want to test it and make sure things are working here, right? So inside of this template literal string with the backticks, do an opening and closing H4 tags, and then in between those tags, the content of the H4, you're going to do the dollar and then the curly braces, which you might recall this is how you interpolate JavaScript values into a template literal like this. The spaces, by the way, it's not necessary. I like them because I think it makes it clearer, easier for me to read, but some developers don't use them. It's up to you. It's a coding style thing. And let's just do L.title. Okay, I'm going to test it with just that. So what this should do is it should spit out 4 H4s onto the page, each one containing a different title from those images that I gave you from the gallery.json. So I go over here and there they are. Instead of being spat out to the console, here they are on the actual page. So cool. Nothing special there. But I'm glad that things are working, right? Just for fun, let me just show you what you get with, this is a little bit going back to like chapter 2, I think, in the textbook. If you just spit out L and notice that it gives you object. This is going back to how JavaScript does type conversion implicitly. If you tell it to do something with an inappropriate type of data, then it will convert it to the type of data that it thinks is appropriate. So what I'm asking it to do is to take each object from that array and put it onto the HTML page, and it's saying, hey, an object is not a string. All I can do is put strings on this HTML document. That's it. So it's taking the object and it's converting it to a string that is like, it's not a reference to the object, but it's kind of a shorthand indicating, hey, this thing is an object. I don't know how to describe it any better than that, but I'm showing you that because if you're anything like me, then once in a while you're just going to get this kind of thing that shows up on your page. And when that happens, you're going to know, oh wait, I asked it to put a whole object onto the page, and what I need to do is loop through it instead, or grab some, property of that object or something like that. So anyway, you will see that at some point. So now I'm grabbing a property of the object, and things are working as expected. If you want to wrap the whole thing into an element, which I do, I'm going to use, what did I say, a figure. I like to just put them like right here at the beginning, and then at the end. You don't have to. You could make new lines for those if you want to. And now that we know things are working, we can just go ahead and just slap them right in here. I guess I will do, yeah, let's do the image next. So this is going to be image. An image needs a source attribute. It also needs an alt attribute. And then if you need to like make reference to this, I mean, you could go back to like uncomment the L, or you could just look at the file itself. But if I uncomment this for a moment to see, again, what I've got available, what properties I have available to choose from, and go over here to the browser and then pop one open, and there it is. We've got the alt tag right there. So it's just going to be l.alt, and then the file name is going to be l.filename inside the images subfolder. So this is going to be images slash, and then interpolate a value like so, and l dot, or just looking at what was the file name, and then the alt is I'll interpolate l dot alt. Okay, and now we're getting these big images, which I really should have made smaller for you guys, but here they are. Getting the H4 in the image, we're not, and the alt tag, I can just right click and inspect to make sure that that's showing up all right, and there it is. There's the alt, exactly as I would expect it. I wonder if this will help if we take main, and I think I've got skeleton.js still in here. Oh no, I do not. We just added that last time. Is that right? Okay. So that's okay. That's fine. I'm not too worried with how it looks right now. Right now, I just want to make sure everything's working and we're getting the content that we want to on the page. And there's one more thing we said. We're going to do a fig caption. And then one more interpolation here, and this is going to be L.description. So again, just another property that was exposed to me by the JSON file that we fetched in. And there it is, the H4, the image, and then underneath each image and a fig caption, a description. And now we can pass this off to our CSS front-end web developer designer in order to make this something that people could actually look at without suffering from conniptions. So let me just clean this up a little bit. I'm going to leave that in here because, again, this is an important part of just figuring out what you're dealing with. And same thing with this one. And other than that, I will leave it like so. So this is the first part of tonight. This is using plain old vanilla JavaScript, no libraries, no frameworks, nothing like that, to fetch in data from an external file. So what we have to do next, after we take a break, is we will try fetching data from a remote source, so from an online source that has exposed data to us through the use of an API key. So any questions about this part of it before we go on a break? Anybody have trouble with it? Did it not work for anyone?
Mine didn't work. I don't know.
Mine neither.
Okay, you guys using the live server and everything?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let me stop the recording, and then before we take a break, let's go ahead and take a look at those and see what we can see.